The earth trembled beneath their monstrous feet. The sky, once blue, had turned a sickly orange, choked with the smoke of burning cities and the ash of shattered lives. The Ekar had arrived not quietly, not cautiously, but with all the arrogance of a conquering empire certain of its dominance. They didn't bother with subtlety. They didn't hide behind diplomacy or false pretense. No, when the Ekar came, they came like gods descending from the stars. The initial landings were swift and unrelenting. Massive, six-legged carriers the size of skyscrapers punched through the clouds, igniting the atmosphere with thunderous sonic booms. Their landing pods drilled into the soil with brutal efficiency, spewing out armored infantry and towering war machines that looked like metallic titans. They moved like juggernauts, relentless and mechanical, sending shockwaves through the earth with every pounding step. To the Ekar, this was not war. It was extermination. Commander Kenix stood atop one of the lead war machines as it strode across what had once been a fertile plain in southern Europe. The landscape now was unrecognizable, burnt, cratered, and dead. His four crystalline eyes scanned the battlefield, calculating and precise. His exoskeletal armor shimmered with hues of blue and gunmetal, glinting under the sun's pale, polluted light. Thick, chitinous plates overlapped across his arms and torso, and his mandibles twitched with anticipation as he gazed across the horizon. This was supposed to be simple. His species, the Ekar, had conquered more than 24 worlds. Their process was always the same: observe, assess, strike. They scouted Earth for years, analyzing its culture, infrastructure, military capabilities, and psychological behavior. Every data point fed into a singular conclusion: humans were soft, weak, emotionally volatile, disorganized. They lacked the unity and technological prowess to withstand an Ekar assault. Their weapons were outdated, their military structures fractured by politics and infighting. Most importantly, they were prone to fear, and fear to the Ekar was the most exploitable weapon in any arsenal. Kenix remembered the briefing well. Their science cast had reviewed years of intercepted transmissions, news coverage, and behavioral logs. Every study pointed to one outcome. Once the Ekar deployed their full force, humans would scatter. The cities would fall. The people would panic. Governments would collapse. Resistance, if any, would be minimal and fragmented. He had believed it. They all had. And so, when the invasion was finally greenlit, it came without hesitation. From the black void of space, the Ekar fleet dropped into low orbit. A wave of destruction followed. In a matter of days, their orbital bombardments had crippled key communications networks, neutralized satellite constellations, and dismantled several national defense grids. A dozen major cities lay in ruins. The smoke from New York still coiled into the sky, visible even from orbit, yet something was wrong. Kenix watched as human forces began to gather not just in military bases, but across decimated neighborhoods, forests, and ruined infrastructure. They didn't run, at least not all of them. Instead of cowering, they regrouped. Makeshift outposts sprang up from the rubble. Convoys rolled through abandoned highways, their camouflage faded and worn, but still operational. Within hours of the initial landings, humans had mounted counterattacks. Small ones at first, targeting scout drones and forward patrols, but effective nonetheless. The element of fear had not taken hold as expected. The Ekar weren't concerned at first. These were mere remnants, they told themselves, fleeting gestures of defiance before the inevitable collapse. But Kenix, a seasoned commander who had overseen the subjugation of 3 worlds, wasn't so sure. He narrowed his eyes on a distant ridgeline where human forces had gathered. It wasn't a conventional military formation, no formation really, just clusters of men and women soldiers, maybe civilians armed with an eclectic mix of gear. Some carried advanced rifles, Others bore hunting weapons, repurposed gear, even old ballistic firearms that should have been obsolete by now. And yet they stood, unmoved by the presence of the towering war machines now bearing down on them. Kennox felt the first twinge of doubt. "Are they rallying?" he asked aloud, his translator echoing his thoughts in the guttural clicks of his native tongue. "Yes, Commander," responded his second-in-command, a younger Ekar officer named Zayler. "They appear to be organizing resistance sectors around strategic points. We've observed them reinforcing positions near supply routes and communication nexuses." Kennox's mandibles twitched again, but not in anticipation this time. It was irritation. "They were supposed to break. We have crushed more advanced civilizations with half the effort," he hissed. "Their weapons are primitive, their armor non-existent, their air superiority stripped. What drives them to stand?" Zayler paused. "Uncertain, perhaps. Fear does not rule them as we assumed." That possibility lingered like smoke in Kennox's mind. He refused to speak it aloud. The idea that these fragile, chaotic bipeds could possess a strength beyond logic was troubling. His war machine stopped at the edge of a shallow valley. Below, a human outpost clung to the earth like a stubborn weed. Sandbags, wrecked vehicles converted into barricades, camouflage netting, a weathered flag fluttering weakly in the breeze, and soldiers, dozens of them. Not retreating, not running. They were waiting. One of them, standing atop a makeshift tower, raised a pair of binoculars to his face. He saw Kennox. The two locked eyes for a brief second. The human didn't flinch. He didn't wave. He didn't panic. He simply lowered the binoculars, turned to his comrades, and raised a clenched fist. And then the humans began to move. Defensive formations tightened. Weapons were checked. Orders shouted. Kennox recognized the coordination imperfect, but effective. This was not the response of a broken people. "They should be afraid," Kennox muttered, but they weren't. He turned to his command unit, issuing orders to deploy forward assault walkers and initiate a full-pressure advance. If intimidation didn't work, perhaps annihilation would. Across the field, the war machines charged. Tons of reinforced alloy and plasma energy roared across the ground. Cannons primed. Drones launched into the air. It was a storm of alien dominance designed to break any resistance by sheer presence. It had worked on every world before. But on Earth, something different happened. The humans fired first. A wave of bullets, conventional, yes, but tightly concentrated, rained down on the Ekar units. Mortars arced into the air from dug-in positions. Some exploded harmlessly, but others found weak points under joints, between armor plates near sensors. One of the smaller assault walkers stumbled, its optics shattered. Kennox leaned forward, watching the chaos unfold. This wasn't senseless resistance. This was organized, tactical. The humans had studied them too. By the time the first Ekar unit reached the barricades, half of its support drones were down. A forward unit was ambushed by a trio of human soldiers armed with repurposed mining equipment turned into explosive devices. One Ekar warrior was dragged down by 5 humans working in unison, striking at vulnerable armor seams with relentless precision. It was madness, and yet it worked. Zayler returned to his commander's side, his voice tense. "We've encountered more resistance than projected. Casualties mounting. The humans are adapting." Kennox felt a cold sensation settle beneath his armored plating. Adaptation. That was a word he hadn't feared in centuries. Most species reacted to Ekar presence with predictable desperation. They broke, they ran, they begged. But these humans, they learned. They regrouped, they retaliated. Kennox turned back to the battlefield, watching a squad of humans use one of their downed vehicles as a ramp to launch themselves over Ekar cover. It was reckless, bold, insane, and effective. He had seen enough. Kennex snapped open a comm link, sending a message to the orbital fleet. Reinforce all ground units. Increase suppression levels. This species is more dangerous than anticipated. He didn't want to admit it yet, not fully, but the signs were clear. They had miscalculated. Earth was not going to fall in days, perhaps not even weeks. These people were not broken, they were rising. As the sun dipped below the smoky horizon, and the ground continued to tremble beneath the boots of alien war machines, Kennex stared at the human lines again. Still standing, still fighting. It made no sense. And yet it was undeniable. The humans weren't running, they were resisting. And for the first time since the campaign began, Commander Kennex felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Concern. The Ekar expected a rout. What they got was a wall. When their war machines crested the ridge and bore down on the human line, the battlefield should have collapsed into chaos. It always had on every other world. Smaller species, lesser ones, would throw down their weapons and scatter like birds before a wildfire. But this time, something else happened. The humans didn't run. They didn't hide. They dug in. They fought. It started with a single voice. Hold the line. Don't give them an inch. Captain Mark Briggs shouted the order over the roar of approaching death. His voice was hoarse, soaked with grit, smoke, and adrenaline. Around him, soldiers scrambled into position behind piles of rubble, rusted vehicles, and sandbags, stacked by trembling hands just hours before. The words cut through fear like a blade. Soldiers, many of them barely trained, snapped into place. Rifles raised, eyes narrowed. Their bodies quaked, but their resolve was iron. Briggs didn't look like much of a hero. His uniform was torn and scorched, his face lined with grime and a week's worth of stress. A ragged scar ran down his temple from a near miss back in the first wave of the invasion. But his eyes burned with that kind of fierce steadiness that could hold a line together when everything else was falling apart. To his left, Sergeant Morales shouted at a cluster of recruits. Eyes up. Watch the tree line. Fire in short bursts and aim for the gaps, joints, and visors. The kid looked like he should have been finishing high school, not dodging plasma blasts in a war zone. He crouched behind a stack of broken concrete, his hands trembling around the rifle. Dust coated his cheeks, mixing with sweat. His breath came quick, but he didn't break. Not yet. The Ekar opened fire first. Bright streaks of green plasma tore through the air, vaporizing anything they touched. A section of the barricade exploded into molten shrapnel, taking 2 soldiers with it. The concussive force knocked Jackson flat, the heat licking his face. He heard nothing but ringing for a few seconds, just a high, endless tone, and then the screams cut through. But then he saw Sergeant Morales drop beside him, eyes sharp, pointing. Jackson, don't look, shoot. Aim for that joint on the big one's right leg now. The haze and saw the alien charging. It was massive, 12 feet tall, armored in dark metal, with blue light seeping from its seams. Its gait was unnatural, like something that shouldn't exist, let alone run. But Morales' voice snapped him into action. Bullets pinged off the armor, mostly, but one struck the exposed actuator beneath the knee. The thing stumbled. Jackson fired again, this time catching the alien square in the faceplate. It let out a terrible screech, fell backward, and didn't get up. He stared, stunned. He had just killed one, and more were coming. All around them, the front line exploded into a brutal firefight. Human rifles lit up the dusk. Bullets cracked the air, ricocheted off twisted metal and alien plating. Artillery boomed in the distance, lobbing high, arcing shells into the sky that came down with the fury of thunder, tearing through clusters of Ekar soldiers and sending limbs flying. The aliens weren't used to this kind of fight. They were used to domination. But the humans didn't give them that. Briggs moved through the chaos like a conductor directing an orchestra of survival. He barked orders to mortar teams, directed wounded to fall back and be replaced. He cursed at faulty comms, patched bleeding soldiers, and reloaded his own rifle while ducking incoming fire. Every second he stayed alive meant the line held a little longer, and every soldier saw him unflinching, unyielding, and they fought harder. From his command post overlooking the field, Commander Kennox watched in disbelief. They had deployed overwhelming force. The humans were outgunned, out-armored, and outnumbered. Yet their line held. Their movements were messy, their gear inconsistent. Many of their weapons were relics by Ekar standards. Some were literal museum pieces or retrofitted civilian tools. The Ekar bled. Kennox had never seen his kind bleed like this. He clicked his mandibles in disbelief. "This isn't a military response," he muttered. "It's instinctual, ferocious, primal," Zaylor added quietly beside him. Kennox didn't respond. He was beginning to realize this wasn't about tactics or even survival. These humans weren't fighting because they thought they could win. They were fighting because they refused to lose. As the battle wore on, the humans began to push back. They coordinated fire. A squad of snipers used the ruins of a church tower to pick off Ekar commanders. A machine gun nest mowed down an entire column of advancing infantry until a plasma shell finally silenced it. But for every human that fell, two more stepped up. At one point, a trio of human engineers crawled through the sewers and emerged behind Ekar lines, planting crude but powerful explosives on the legs of an assault walker. The blast brought the giant machine crashing down into the mud, where it was quickly swarmed by riflemen who picked off the surviving crew as they tried to escape. They weren't supposed to be capable of this. The data had shown nothing of the sort, and that, Kennox now understood, was the problem. The data had studied peace, of bureaucracy and entertainment, the soft version of their kind, the version they let the galaxy see. This was something else. This was survival mode humanity, desperate, and no amount of data could have predicted what that would look like. By nightfall, the battlefield was littered with bodies, both human and alien. Smoke hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of burned metal and scorched flesh. But the human lines still stood, battered, bloodied. Jackson sat against a half-crumbled wall, cradling his rifle like a lifeline. His hands no longer trembled. His face had changed. He was 18, but his eyes were older now. Tired, determined. Morales limped by with a blood-soaked bandage wrapped around his thigh and clapped the kid on the shoulder. "Hell of a first day," he said with a grim chuckle. Jackson managed a weak smile. "We stopped them. For now," Morales replied, then looked out toward the darkening horizon. "They'll be back, stronger. But we'll be ready." Back at the command post, Captain Briggs leaned over a hand-drawn map lit by a flickering lantern. Radios crackled with static. Medical tents were overflowing. Ammunition was low, but morale was high. He circled a few critical points on the map with a stub of charcoal and addressed the surviving officers. "They'll try to regroup and strike at dawn. We don't wait for them. We hit them first, disrupt their lines, make them feel it." One of the lieutenants nodded. "You think we can hold?" Briggs looked up, his face half-shadowed. "I know we can. Because we're not just defending land anymore. We're defending everything we are. And we're not gonna let these bastards take it." Outside the command post, soldiers began reloading weapons, reinforcing barricades, and tending to the wounded. They were exhausted, they were outmatched, but they were unbroken. And somewhere far above them, on the bridge of an orbiting dreadnought, an Ikar strategist looked down on the glowing planet below and asked a question that hadn't been asked in generations. What happens? The flashes of artillery and plasma fire painted everything in surreal hues of orange and green. Smoke curled thick around the broken earth, turning breathing into a chore and sight into guesswork. But through the haze, through the screaming metal and thunder, there were still people, moving, fighting, not just surviving, but making a stand. They weren't just soldiers anymore, they were symbols. Private Jackson, once just a fresh-faced teenager from Ohio who had never left his hometown before enlistment, now crawled through shattered concrete and tangled rebar with a rifle gripped tight to his chest and the blood of 3 aliens on his uniform. It didn't feel like it was his first battle anymore. Not after today. He could still feel the moment, the terror and the thrill when that first Ikar fell under his fire. He remembered its scream. He remembered the blue blood hitting his boots. And more than anything, he remembered not freezing. He should have. Everything in him had screamed to run, but he didn't. Because beside him had been Sergeant Morales, yelling over the chaos, voice cutting through the fear like a knife. Aim for the joints and the eyes, Jackson. You hear me? That's where they bleed. It had been enough. Just enough. And that voice, those words, had stayed with him ever since. Now, Jackson moved through a corridor of ruined buildings that had once been a small farming village. The homes were unrecognizable roofs, collapsed walls, blackened, and debris scattered like confetti in a storm. He ducked into what remained of a living room, its furniture burned down to frames, and knelt beside Morales. The sergeant was rewrapping the bloody bandage around his thigh, muttering curses under his breath. His hands were steady despite the wound, and his face craggy, worn, framed by a wild beard and streaked with dried blood, looked more stone than skin. You good? Jackson asked, voice low. Morales didn't look up. Ain't got time to bleed. Jackson managed a weak grin. That line had been used a dozen times since the invasion started, but something about Morales saying it made it feel real. Command wants us to sweep east. Make sure no stragglers are regrouping, Jackson said. Morales nodded, finishing his wrap and standing with a grunt. Then let's sweep. They moved together, quiet, controlled, 2 figures navigating hell with the precision of men who had been doing it longer than they really had. Around them, fires smoldered in the wreckage. Somewhere in the distance, a woman screamed, followed by rapid gunfire. The war never really stopped. It just changed locations. Down the road, near what used to be a mechanic's garage, they came across the remains of an Ekar scout team. 2 of the aliens lay in contorted heaps, chitin armor split open like crushed beetles. One was still alive, crawling with a trail of blue blood, soaking the earth behind it. Its mandibles twitched weakly as it looked up at them. Jackson instinctively raised his rifle, but Morales held out a hand. Wait. He crouched beside the alien, staring at it. It hissed, tried to reach for its weapon. Morales responded with a single shot to the head, point blank. No hesitation, no emotion. That one killed Corporal Tanner back at the ridge, he said, voice quiet. Jackson didn't ask how he knew. He just nodded. They moved on. Back at the forward operating camp, acts of bravery were becoming commonplace. Not because the soldiers weren't afraid. They were. Inside a shattered church that now served as a makeshift medical post, Corporal Riley worked through exhaustion to keep her comrades alive. Her gloves were soaked with blood red and blue, and her voice was hoarse from hours of shouting. Keep pressure here, she ordered. pointing to a soldier's abdomen. He was barely conscious, shrapnel lodged in his side, eyes fluttering as if trying to leave the pain behind. Riley knelt beside him, pushing bandages into the wound with shaking hands. "You're not dying today, Jenkins. You hear me? We're gonna get you patched up and back on your feet. Don't lie to me." Jenkins wheezed. Riley leaned in closer. "If I was lying, I'd tell you that I liked your haircut." He let out a weak laugh. That was all she needed. She kept working. In the far corner of the church, a child cried. A girl, maybe 10, found in the rubble by a recon unit earlier that morning. Her parents had been killed in the first strikes. No one knew what to do with her, but she refused to leave the camp. She sat with her back against the altar, clutching a ragged stuffed bear, eyes wide but dry, watching. One of the engineers, a man named Foster, sat beside her during breaks, telling her stories about how he once helped build a suspension bridge in Canada. It wasn't much, but it helped. Elsewhere, in the fields south of the ridge, another story unfolded. Corporal Henry Tank Barrett had earned his nickname not from his physique, which was impressive, but from his sheer unwillingness to fall. He'd taken a glancing plasma blast to the chest the day before and still led a countercharge that repelled an armored walker. Now, Barrett crouched behind a rusted tractor. A missile launcher braced against his shoulder. Ahead, in the dusk light, a new Ekar assault drone hovered above the treetops, sleek, fast, deadly. He waited. The targeting system whined in his ears, locking on. Behind him, his spotter, Corporal Engo, breathed evenly. "You only get one shot at this," she warned. "I only need one," Barrett replied. The drone inched closer, scanning for heat signatures. It hadn't spotted them yet, but it would. It always did. The lock clicked. Barrett exhaled, pressed the trigger. The missile screamed through the air and struck the drone square in its underbelly. A flash of light, a burst of heat, and then the drone exploded in a fireball that lit the nearby woods like sunrise. Debris rained down across the treetops. Barrett didn't flinch. "That's for Faki Collins," he said, spitting into the dirt. Go nodded, already preparing their next move. They had 2 more warheads and a long list of names, self-pinned under heavy fire. Plasma bolts scorched the ground inches from his head. Dirt kicked into his face as the next volley slammed into the embankment behind him. He rolled into cover beside Lieutenant Harper, who had a radio unit strapped to her back and blood soaking through her sleeve. "We need those mortars up now," Briggs barked. "I've been trying," Harper shouted back, fiddling with the setting. Too much interference signals bouncing off the wreckage. Briggs growled in frustration, then snatched the handset. "This is Captain Briggs. Any available artillery unit, respond. We need cover on Sector Delta 2 immediately." Then faint, distorted came a reply. "Copy." The air split with sonic cracks, and fire rained down on the advancing Ekar squad that had them pinned. The enemy line broke, retreating into the smoke. Briggs stood, wiping soot from his face. "That's more like it," he muttered. He reached down, offering a hand to Harper. She took it. "Let's get our people moving. We've got ground to take back." As the hours passed, the battlefield became a patchwork of horror and hope. Bodies lined the trenches, both human and alien. Craters marked the places where men had made their last stand. A mechanic named Jules hot-wired an abandoned alien hoverbike and rode it straight into an Ekar weapons platform, jumping off seconds before it exploded. A sniper team, trapped behind enemy lines, held their position for 13 hours, picking off command units until finally rescued. A supply convoy, led by a 72-year-old retired truck driver, who joined the resistance after losing his grandson, pushed through enemy fire to deliver food and ammunition to a besieged outpost. Everywhere you looked, the human spirit burned. It wasn't about tactics anymore. It was will, grit, love. None of these people had ever planned to be heroes. Most of them had just wanted to go home. But when the world fell apart, they didn't fall with it. They stood up. They fought. And each time one of them did, the Ikar faltered. He saw it in the reports piling onto his tactical console, casualties higher than projections, losses in key sectors, human adaptability exceeding expectations. His soldiers were beginning to doubt. Some even feared, because it wasn't just that humans were fighting, it was that they refused to lose. And with every act of bravery, every sacrifice, the Ekar were reminded of something they had failed to account for. You can't conquer something that refuses to surrender. The moans of the wounded drifted over the battlefield. Smoke still rose from charred wreckage, mingling with the cool, metallic scent of alien blood and scorched steel. Everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the next wave came. Captain Briggs stood near the center of the human forward command post, a makeshift structure of scavenged steel, sandbags, and broken fencing, lit by portable lamps that hummed with weak yellow light. Around him, the surviving members of the command unit crowded in, some crouched, others standing stiffly with arms crossed. All of them bore the same look: exhaustion barely held at bay by sheer grit. Briggs leaned over a salvage table where a map of the region had been spread out and marked with charcoal, blood, and urgency. "They're regrouping," he said flatly. "Scouts report Ikar reinforcements pouring in from the north. Fresh troops, bigger walkers, more supplies." "Great," Morales muttered, shifting his weight. His leg was bandaged from the earlier fight, the dried blood darkening the cloth. He leaned on a piece of rebar he turned into a makeshift cane. "Just what we need. Round 2, before we've even had time to breathe." Briggs ignored the sarcasm. He tapped a specific point on the map, just outside the red-circled area that marked their front-line perimeter. "This is where they're staging. Supply depots, mobile shield units, refueling stations. We take that out. We cut the legs out from under them before they can hit us again." "Intel confirm that?" Harper asked, her voice gravelly from smoke inhalation. Briggs nodded. "Drone flyby, right before they jammed the skies. Their perimeter's tight, but they're overconfident." Then Morales leaned over, studying the route with narrowed eyes. "You want a team to slip in under cover of night and blow it all to hell." "Exactly that," Briggs said. "In and out, hit 'em hard and fast. We create chaos. Buy ourselves time for the real fight come dawn." Morales grinned slowly. "I'll go." "No," Briggs cut in. "You're injured." "I'm not dead." Briggs raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He knew Morales too well. Telling him no would only guarantee he'd go anyway. "Take 6, Briggs said. "Keep it small. I want charges on fuel tanks, plasma batteries, anything they can't fight without." "We'll make it hurt," Morales promised. Private Jackson, standing off to the side and still favoring his bruised leg, stepped forward. "Sir, request to join the op." Briggs looked him over. The kid had survived his first battle. Barely, but there was something in his eyes now. No longer panic, no longer confusion. Now it was resolve. "Fine," Briggs said. "But you stick to Morales. Don't do anything stupid." Jackson nodded. "Yes, sir." They moved out just before midnight. 7 soldiers slipped into the shadows like ghosts, faces smeared with ash, gear stripped to essential. They carried silenced weapons, small packs of CF4, and a shared understanding. This mission wasn't about glory. The ground was soft from blood and ash. muffling their footsteps. The sky above was cloudless, the stars distant and indifferent to the war below. They moved through the ruins of what had once been a school, now reduced to a husk of brick and rusted rebar. Past that, through skeletal woods, still smoldering from plasma strikes, Jackson stuck close to Morales, keeping low, his rifle tight to his chest. Every shadow felt like a trap. Every rustle of leaves sounded like death. But Morales was steady, always steady. He moved like the earth itself had trained him. Efficient, quiet, dangerous. They reached the edge of the Icar staging ground 2 hours before dawn. It was massive, dozens of alien vehicles, walking mechs recharging under the eerie glow of plasma generator. Fuel tanks the size of trucks lined the far wall. Alien soldiers patrolled in squads, their glowing eyes scanning the darkness. Overhead, several floating drones orbited on slow patrol patterns, their sensors sweeping the area like spotlights. "Jesus," someone whispered. "It's a damn fortress." Morales signaled for silence and gestured for the team to spread out. They moved with practiced precision, fanning across the landscape, crawling through trenches, sliding under fences, ducking behind stacked crates of alien munitions. Every movement was deliberate, every step calculated. Jackson and Morales crept toward the fuel depot first. Morales pulled a small pouch from his pack, revealing several bricks of 4 rigged with magnetic clamps and timer. "We'll place charges every 20 feet, Morales said quietly. "Hit the base of the tanks. Chain reaction should take out the whole block." Jackson took 2 bricks and nodded, hands steady, despite the sweat beating down his neck. One by one, the soldiers set their charges. Foster and Chin, 2 engineers from the central line, snuck into the power relay and disabled one of the anti-air systems. Meanwhile, Doyle and Ingo placed detonators along the ammunition crates stacked in a secondary depot. It went smoothly until it didn't. A pair of Icar patrol troopers rounded a corner earlier than expected. They spotted Jackson crouched near a fuel cell, planting a charge. Their translator barked an alarm, and in an instant everything snapped into chaos. "Loads," Morales shouted, bringing up his rifle and dropping one of the aliens with a shot to the faceplate. The other fired back a plasma bolt searing past Jackson's arm, scorching the sleeve but missing flesh. The soldiers scattered. Gunfire erupted. Silencers forgotten. Survival became the priority. "Detonate now, or we lose the shot," Foster screamed from across the compound. "Not yet," Morales shouted back. "We don't have everyone clear." Jackson sprinted toward cover, diving behind a storage crate as a bolt shattered the ground where he'd just been. He pulled the detonator from his vest, heart pounding, and glanced across the field. Ingo was pinned down. One of the Icar mechs was scanning the area, its cannon warming. He ran full tilt through open ground, drawing fire as he screamed, "Get down!" He reached Ingo and shoved her into the trench just as the plasma bolt exploded behind them, lifting both into the air and slamming them into the dirt. Morales saw it all. "Now," he shouted. "Light him up." Jackson, dazed but alive, fumbled for the detonator. His thumb found the button. He pressed it. The explosion lit up the night like sunrise. A thunderous roar rolled across the field as the charges went off in sequence. Fuel tanks erupting into fireballs, ammunition crates cooking off into a symphony of destruction. The ground shook. Towers collapsed. Mechs toppled sideways in a hail of sparks and flame. The patrols fell into disarray. Alarms screamed. Orders were shouted in garbled alien speech. And amidst the chaos, the humans retreated, limping, bleeding, grinning. Morales was the last to pull back, dragging an injured Doyle over one shoulder. "Come on," he growled. "We ain't dying in the fireworks." The team regrouped 2 miles out, lungs burning, gear half-torched, but alive. "Status?" Morales asked, dropping Doyle gently beside a rock. "Ngo's banged up," Foster said. "Doyle's got shrapnel. Jackson's ear's bleeding. Otherwise, we're all breathing." Jackson sat slumped against a tree, helmet gone, dust and sweat coating every inch of skin. But his smile was wide and real. "That was something," he said between deep breaths. "Yeah," Morales said, offering a canteen. "It was." Back at the command post, Briggs watched the distant horizon turn orange. It wasn't dawn. It was fire. The saboteurs had succeeded. Icar communications went silent. Reinforcements were stalled. Chaos spread across their ranks. Commanders shouted into dead comms. War machines lack fuel. Artillery systems froze without power. The humans, battered and barely standing, now had something they hadn't possessed since the first day of the invasion. Briggs lowered his binoculars as the glow of destruction reflected in his eyes. Behind him, other soldiers began cheering. Some raised their rifles, others collapsed from the weight of the night. But all of them understood what that raid meant. For once, the enemy bled first. For once, they'd hit back in a way the Icar didn't expect. And it worked. "Tell Morales and his team," Briggs said, voice heavy with pride. "They just bought this army a chance." The first light of morning wasn't golden or warm. It was red. A thick crimson hue filtered through the smoke of burning machines, reflecting off shattered glass and the still glowing fires from the night raid. The battlefield, once a sprawling field of wheat and stone, had become something else entirely, something unrecognizable. Captain Briggs stood with one foot on a slab of concrete that had once been a school wall, peering over the horizon with a pair of scratched binoculars. His face was hard, unreadable. His uniform burned at the seams, his jaw clenched with tension. They'd bought themselves time with that raid. Morales and the others had done the impossible. They'd punched a hole in the Icar's advance. For the first time since the aliens landed, the humans had struck first. And it worked. It gave them hours, maybe less, maybe more, but it gave them something even more critical than time. It gave them momentum. But the Icar weren't about to let that go unanswered. In the eerie silence before the next storm, the earth began to tremble. Not from bombs, not from mortars, but from footsteps, heavy, rhythmic, distant at first, then closer. Then the ground shivered beneath them. Private Jackson looked up from where he was reloading magazines behind the front trench. His legs still hurt, bandaged tightly from the previous battle, but he didn't need both legs to understand what that sound meant. "Something's coming," he said, mostly to himself. A spotter to his left, an older corporal with cracked goggles and shaking hands, lifted a scope to his eye. Sweet Jesus! Across the scorched field, shapes began to appear through the haze taller than any Icar walker they'd seen. Humanoid in design, but monstrous in presence. Towering machines of war, armor-plated, painted in obsidian black and gleaming silver. Thick arms built like battering rams. Weapons fused directly into limbs. Shields of alien alloy braced to their backs. They moved like freight trains, slow, steady, unstoppable. "Iron fists," Briggs muttered. "We finally brought in their big boys." Morales appeared beside him, still limping, a blood-stained bandage peeking from under his sleeve. "I've only heard rumors. Elite shock troops, only deployed when they want to end something permanently." Then let's make sure they don't, Briggs said. The iron fists began to spread out, flanked by dozens of smaller Icar infantry. Plasma bolts lit the sky again, followed by the low hum of drones flying in formation, but the focus was clear. These monsters were the spearhead. They were coming to break the line, to break the humans. Briggs turned to the remaining squad leaders, shouting over the growing storm of artillery. Target the flanks. Hit the joints. The neck seals. Anything soft. Morales, take your team and circle around. Get those demo charges close enough, or we won't make it to lunch. Morales didn't argue. He simply nodded and took off, rallying his remaining soldiers. They disappeared into the rubble, navigating the broken city streets like rats under siege. They were bleeding, exhausted, outgunned. But they moved like a blade in the dark. The iron fists hit the line like thunder. The first one stepped into the kill zone, and the human side unleashed hell. Every rifle opened up, every rocket launched. Explosions bloomed along its sides. Sparks flew from its armor, but it didn't slow. Its left arm raised, revealing a mounted cannon that spat a column of plasma so hot it turned a bunker into molten slag in seconds. Soldiers were vaporized, but the rest didn't break. They kept firing, even as the air around them turned electric from the charge in the atmosphere. Briggs ran alongside a trench team, barking positions and firing his rifle at an advancing Icar platoon. He saw Jackson in the distance, propped against a crumbling stone wall, picking off targets with a steady rhythm despite the brace on his leg. The kid didn't miss. "Sergeant," someone shouted. "They're breaching Sector 3. Briggs didn't hesitate. "Hold it. Everyone with a working gun, get there." One of the iron fists, damaged on its right leg, staggered slightly, just enough for an RAEP deck. The metal screeched. The machine groaned. And then, with a crash that shook the ridge, it fell. It didn't stop moving, just crawled forward like a mechanical beast, clawing through debris and bodies alike. Meanwhile, Morales and his fire team sprinted along a back trench, hugging the side of a fallen comm tower. "We hit them from the side," Morales said, pointing at the biggest one. "Plant the charges near the power coil, that glowing piece of hell in the lower back. You see it, you blow it." "Won't be easy," Foster muttered, cradling a satchel full of 4. "That thing's built like a tank inside another tank." "Then we better aim for the cracks." As they moved closer, a stray plasma bolt clipped Chen, burning clean through his side. He dropped instantly. Morales didn't flinch. He took the satchel from Chen's limp fingers, nodded once, and kept moving. As the iron fist tore through the front line, Morales' team emerged behind it. Go popped up first, firing into its flank to get its attention. The giant turned, just as Morales slid underneath it and slapped the explosives to its spine. He rolled clear, just as the charge detonated. The explosion was deafening. The iron fist staggered, its back ripped open, sparks pouring out like a fountain. It tried to stabilize but collapsed, onto one knee. Then came the second charge. Jackson had limped into position with an extra pack of C4 he'd recovered from the last raid. He hurled it through the breach in the iron fist's back. It landed inside, somewhere near the power core. He didn't wait. He clicked the detonator. The explosion tore the beast in half. The shockwave silenced the battlefield for 2 full seconds. Then cheering. The bastard's down. Another iron fist was destroyed minutes later, brought low by artillery from a squad that had hidden a salvage tank in the ruins of a shopping mall. The last one turned to retreat, but Briggs wasn't going to allow that. He rallied the remaining troops, leading a charge that pushed back the remaining Icar units. They surged forward, screaming through blood and fire, past the trenches, over the wreckage. They were tired, hurting, but they weren't broken. Not even close. Commander Kennox watched the battle unfold from his mobile command platform, his claws tightening around the edge of the console. He watched his iron fists fall, creations that had conquered empires, brought low by inferior weapons and inferior bodies. No, not inferior. He had to admit that now. They were relentless. They were angry. They were human, and they weren't losing. He stepped forward. "Bring me my armor," he ordered. His guards hesitated. Now, minutes later, Kennox entered the fray himself. He stood nearly 8 feet tall in his personal battle armor, an amalgamation of ceremonial plating and advanced shielding. He moved like a living tank, and every swing of his blade arm sent soldiers flying. Briggs spotted him from the ridge. "That's him," he said. "Kennox, are you sure?" Harper asked, ducking behind cover. "I'd recognize that smug alien face anywhere." He stood up despite the bullets. "Cover me." Then he ran. He cut across the burning battlefield, sliding under alien fire, vaulting debris, sidestepping death. Around him, the fight raged, metal against flesh, flame against bone. But Briggs had a singular focus. He closed the distance. Kennox turned, just as Briggs reached him. Their eyes locked, human and Icar. "You're a fool," Kennox hissed. "You can't win." Briggs didn't respond. He raised his rifle and fired point blank into the alien's visor. The shots pinged off the plating, but one hit a seam, cracking the lens. Kennox lunged. Briggs rolled, dodging a blade arm that tore a crater in the ground. He came up swinging, slamming the butt of his rifle into the alien's chest, then drawing his combat knife and driving it toward Kennox's exposed joint. It sank in. Kennox screamed. The two commanders clashed, one powered by rage and honor, the other by desperation and grit. Every strike echoed across the battlefield. Finally, Briggs tackled Kennox to the ground, wrestling him into the dirt. He jammed the knife into the alien's chest, right of the heart. Kennox gasped. "Impossible." He choked. Briggs twisted the blade. "Not for us." The alien commander's body fell back into the mud, armor cracked, blood leaking into the soil. For a moment, the battlefield froze. Their cohesion broke. Orders were confused. Retreat began in waves. The humans saw their chance, and they took it. Briggs stood, panting, face smeared with ash and blood, watching as the tide turned. His men rallied. The aliens fled. And for the first time, victory felt real. By dusk, the battlefield belonged to Earth. Too many had died. Too much had been lost. But they had done it. They had faced monsters, and they had won. Morales found Briggs sitting on a rock, watching the stars appear through the haze. "You look like hell," Morales said. Briggs cracked a smile. "You should see the other guy." Behind them, Jackson limped over with a fresh bandage and a tired grin. "We did it," he said. "We stood. The battlefield was quiet." No, this quiet was different. It was thick, haunting, wrapped in the aftertaste of fire and blood. It was the silence that comes when both sides have screamed all they can, when weapons go cold and the air hangs heavy with smoke and ghosts. The sun was setting behind a broken skyline. The once blue sky had turned a dark, burnt orange, painted with the smoke of ruined war machines and alien blood. All across the field, the last cries of battle faded into distant echoes, drowned out by the gentle crackle of dying fires and the low hum of power cells that had survived the final wave. And standing in the heart of it all was Captain Mark Briggs. His boots were caked in mud, his coat torn at the shoulder, blood not all of it, his streak the side of his face. His rifle hung by its strap, empty, the barrel blackened from overuse. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the E-car retreat across the ridge, what was left of them scrambling back toward whatever transports still functioned. No more formations, no more discipline, just scattered groups, leaderless, wounded, and beaten. They were leaving. It was over. Private Jackson limped toward him from the right, one arm slung in a sling made from what looked like the remains of a medic's kit. His other hand gripped a bloody rifle, lowered to the dirt. "Captain," he said, his voice hoarse, "they're really pulling out." "You?" Still trying to believe it himself, Jackson stepped up beside him. They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun dip beneath the horizon, casting long shadows over the field. It almost looked like a painting orange sky, black silhouettes, flickering firelight in the distance. "We actually did it," Jackson said. His voice was somewhere between awe and disbelief. Briggs finally nodded. "Yeah, we did." Around them, the survivors began to gather. Some sat on crates. Others leaned against burned-out vehicles, bandaging wounds, or simply staring off into space. Many didn't speak at all. They were too tired for words, too hollowed out by the fight. But they were alive, and they were together. Sergeant Morales limped in from the far side, carrying a radio that had somehow survived the worst of it. He dropped it beside a broken engine block and winced as he sat down. "It's finally responding," he said. "They picked up what's left of our signal. Took 'em long enough." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "And," they said, "congratulations," Morales grinned bitterly. "Apparently, we saved the region, maybe the whole damn planet." Just a ripple of amusement at how ridiculous it all sounded after everything they'd been through. Briggs reached down and picked up the radio. "This is Captain Briggs, Forward Resistance Command. Enemy has retreated. The line held." "Repeat." "The line held." There was a pause, followed by static and then cheers from the other end. They could hear other resistance cells, some who had fought, just survived, joining in, sending waves of confirmation. The message was spreading. The E-car were beaten. The planet was theirs again. In the following hours, patrols were sent out. Engineers began marking the fallen equipment, salvaging what could be saved. Medics moved through the remains of the battlefield, searching for survivors beneath rubble, behind barricades, under the still smoking hulls of walkers. The cost was high, too high. Corporal Riley, her hands still sticky with drying blood, stood over a row of bodies laid out beside the remains of the church. Some were covered. Others hadn't been found in time for that. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. Not yet. There were still people who needed her to be strong. Foster sat nearby, working on rewiring a power cell into a makeshift heating unit for the injured. His hands shook, but he kept going, because stopping meant feeling, and none of them were ready for that yet. Ngo was alive, bruised, stitched, and furious. She refused to leave the field hospital, and instead patrolled the perimeter with a rifle scavenged from a fallen alien soldier. She didn't trust the quiet. Not yet. Briggs understood. The last time it had been this quiet, the sky had split open and hell had poured out. Later that night, the soldiers gathered around a barrel fire. There weren't many of them left, at least not from this unit. Maybe 40, maybe less. It didn't matter. They didn't count like that anymore. Briggs stood at the edge of the firelight, staring at the faces around him. Some were familiar, others were new. All of them were hardened now, different from the people who had arrived just days ago, expecting to fall or flee. Jackson sat across the fire, one leg stretched out in front of him, wrapped in gauze. His face was smudged with soot. He hadn't spoken much since the sun went down. He just watched the flames flicker and crackle. After a long pause, he finally said something. "I thought I was gonna die." No one replied right away. Then Morales spoke, his voice flat but honest. "Me too." More nods, a few weak laughs. Jackson looked up, eyes glassy in the firelight. "Why didn't we? Why didn't we run?" Briggs finally stepped forward. "Because we couldn't," he said. Jackson frowned. "Couldn't? Or wouldn't?" Briggs knelt down, scooped up a small piece of charred metal from the ground, and tossed it into the fire. It hissed as it touched the flames. Every species the Ikar ever fought, they ran. That's what made them easy. They were logical, predictable, smart, but when things got bad, when survival looked slim, they chose safety. He looked around at the others. But we didn't. Even when logic said we were doomed, we fought. We stayed. He turned to Jackson. That's what they didn't understand. Why we didn't act like everyone else. "Why?" Jackson whispered. Briggs didn't answer right away. He let the silence settle again before finally speaking. "Because this is home," he said. "And because the people next to us are worth dying for." He paused. "And maybe because something deep in us refuses to be told when it's time to quit." In the days that followed, the humans began reclaiming what had been lost. Drones returned to the skies. Communications were reestablished. Reinforcements, long delayed, finally broke through to the front. But they didn't find a broken army. They found something else, something stronger. The resistance, born from desperation, had become something far more powerful: hope. Not just hope that they would survive, but that they could win. Stories of the battle began to spread. Of the night raid, of the Iron Fist falling, of the human captain who stabbed an alien commander through the chest and didn't back down. But the truth was simpler. It wasn't just Briggs. It was all of them. Every soldier who held the line, every medic who saved a life, every engineer who kept the lights on, every civilian who refused to run. That was the story. That was what mattered. Months later, long after the last Ikar ship had limped out of orbit, Earth began to rebuild. Cities rose from ruins. Graves were filled. Monuments were built. And at the center of what would become a national memorial, engraved in steel, salvaged from a fallen alien walker, were the final words of Captain Briggs' report. "But we stood, and we held, and we endured. Not because we were stronger, not because we were smarter, but because we refused to surrender." Epilogue. A lesson for all of us in the years that followed. Historians would tell the story of the Ikar invasion in documentaries and school books. Kids would grow up learning the names of the heroes, some who lived, some who didn't. Military academies would study the tactics. Strategists would analyze the battle maps. Philosophers would debate the morality of war. But in the end, one truth remained above all the rest. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its weapons. It wasn't in its machines or its science. It was in its heart, in its unwillingness to bend when everything else demanded it, in its ability to endure the impossible, to fight back with nothing but willpower and a desperate, reckless, beautiful hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was something worth remembering beyond war, beyond planets, beyond time, because whether we're fighting alien invaders or our own inner darkness, the same truth applies. You don't have to be the strongest. You just have to refuse to fall.